Okay, I've had notification that the previous session is now over. So as we start to welcome the attendees joining us now, well, yes, we'll get kicked off. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I do hope you enjoyed the past session. And yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to our next panel, delving into the critical question of what technologies will drive the journey to net zero. This is an absolutely enormous subject which we could discuss at length for days. In the interests of timekeeping, however, we're going to be covering three main themes of particular importance to the trading community. Firstly, the wider macro context driving this change. Secondly, supply chain footprints. And thirdly, of course, the trading technology itself. My name is Ben Hillary. I'm the Managing Director of Commodities People. And yeah, absolutely thrilled to be joined here today by an exceptionally knowledgeable panel who really bring a really interesting wide range of experiences to the session. We've got Mark Hankins, Director of Enterprise Architecture over at ADM, Samir Saleja, Founder and CEO of Molecule Software, Richard Williamson, CEO of Gen 10, and Joseph Collins, Principal Consultant of Capspire. Panel, thanks so much for being here with us. To our audience, we will be keeping time aside at the end of the panel to answer your questions. So please be posting these in the Q&A box and upvoting others of interest. Also, do make full use of the chat channel for any comments you want to share with the panel and the audience, or even just to say hello and introduce yourself. So, right, to get the ball rolling, let's start with Mark. Mark, I wonder if you could set the scene a little from your position as a technology leader in commodity trading. What do you see as the most important points for the wider industry to consider?
So, as I always say on these types of things, it's behaviours that change things, not technologies. And part of this is the biggest part of this is going to be about getting people to change their behaviours. And in particular, if we think about optimization, that we start optimizing not just for cost or for cash, but we actually start optimizing for carbon as well. So there's a need to change our behaviours, both as individuals, trying to reduce the amount of travel we do, trying to reduce our own footprint, but also that we as companies, we try and optimize. Following on from that, then, whilst there's things like the carbon sequestration technologies and the carbon capture technologies, they can obviously play a big part as well. But one of the things that I think is going to be key is the ability to actually understand the impact and really get the data to really understand the impact of what we're doing. And therefore, without that, we can't optimize. So a lot of this is going to come from getting meaningful data.
Panel, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just want to echo what Mark said. I think, if we're on the journey to net zero, we can focus all we want on compliance with rules and regulations, but I think the companies that do best will be the ones that focus on the spirit of the regulations and why we're going down this path. And they will probably be able to anticipate the changes better than others.
Excellent. Richard, you...
No, we have the time.
Yeah. Well, Samir, going back to you then, as the lone US representative on this panel, what are you seeing as the main differences from where you sit between the US, the European, and the global approaches?
Well, from what we can see of the European side, there's definitely carrots and sticks. And on the US side, it seems today that we mostly have carrots. So in some ways, we're a little bit behind. And I think we see companies in our customer base and elsewhere focusing on trying to make sure to get the carrots in a row because they're as complex. They're complex anyway. And so I think the US is likely to see a rapid acceleration past the carrots to the sticks. And the question is, how will we get there, and in what form will the US get there? From a policy perspective, the U.S. has often lagged other countries in how we, turn the ship. But when we do, we seem to do so in a big way. And so the question is, what form will that take when we get there?
Do any of the other panelists have any experience in this sort of cross-border, cross-regional view?
I think obviously ADM, big US company and big European operations as well. From my perspective, I think what we see is that maybe the consumer message is clearer in the Europe than it is in the US, and as a lot of stuff is driven by consumer, then the European companies tend to have started this journey or pushed their thinking a little bit further than potentially the US. The US, however, are catching up quickly.
Yeah, I reckon. I mean, in other areas where you have, it's better to get the carrots sorted out before you get the regulations to dictate what you have to do. I think it's different with, if I take carbon markets, for example, where you can't separate them because you've got different host countries and they've got their responsibilities. You need to, you can't counter carbon. You can't go to a warehouse and counter carbon credit. So it's almost, there needs to be at least industry coordination, but I don't think you can separate out the sticks, the regulatory part of it, to solve some of these problems, to be able to measure, are we getting closer to net zero or not? So just a little different from other markets where it's a little bit, it's better if it's laissez-faire and the market sorts it out. I don't think that can be the case with this one.
Yeah, good. Well, actually, sticking with you, Richard, you've been in this space for quite some time. How have you seen, and how do you see commodities and carbon markets converging?
Yeah, I mean, it's early days with Carbon 2.0. I guess they are definitely converging. How long it's going to take to fully do it, I mean, on the commodity supply chains. From the consumer perspective, if it's a pen or whatever the end product is, knowing what is the impact on the environment of that piece, it starts at the raw materials. So we're in the right place to start solving these problems. I think, how we prepared our commodity management systems is, allowing people to receive quotes for freight, dollars per ton, dollars per container, or for the cost of the ship or whatever, and putting a place for them to put in what is the carbon cost of that choice. Now I think where to solve the problem properly, I guess we have to go to the point where when people are submitting freight quotes, it's the economic cost, and then there's the carbon cost, which is also an economic cost if you're talking about offsetting that stuff. So, there will be the carbon accounting side on the commodity supply chains. They're just not there yet. That's the scope 3 measurements, right? So the freight companies scope 1 and scope 2 requirements, they should be busy trying to get that together, but it's not there yet. So in the meantime, we have to rely on, there's some quite advanced carbon calculators out there, but it's still kind of averaging stuff, which favors the poor performers and penalizes the good ones, sort of thing. But it's a good first step. I mean, it's better than nothing, but moving to that way. And it's going to be a case where when I'm selling you some cotton, or if I'm selling you some oil, some metals or whatever, just like with the airlines are doing today, I'm offering you the opportunity to offset that for an additional premium, whereby I can then I've then got a carbon book that I need to go and buy the credits in order to offset that in the back. So that there's a great opportunity for convergence there, and I don't see how that can be separate moving forward.
Agreed. Any further comments from the rest of the panel on that?
I think there's a policy question over whether the, let's just say the instrument will always be credits, or whether it needs to take the form of something else. I've been puzzling over that for quite some time as well.
I think the calculator point is very well made as well. We really need to get the science and the calculators as aligned as we can, and ensure that the calculators aren't there to favour one particular segment of an industry or whatever, because lots of good reasons why you can't compare across the industry, but somehow if we are to make carbon optimization decisions, we need to find a way that actually it is more comparable.
And we're starting to see some standardization around that as well, which is nice. Certainly on the offset side, you can see what Expansive is doing with sort of high quality carbon offset credits and providing a standard so that, say, a corporate can come in and just say, I want something that meets the standard, please give me whatever.
Yeah. One of the phrases we hear a lot more of in recent months and years is greenwashing. Looking specifically within the context of technology, what would you say are the main risks and challenges related to greenwashing? We'll go with you, Mark, and then go on to Richard for that question, please.
I think it's greenwashing is obviously we need to find a way of getting rid of it, and when we make a consumer claim, it needs to be possible to trace that back. And of course, the challenge, depending on which commodity you're talking about, is actually getting that visibility through the supply chain so that you can show clearly and consistently that, you know, this was how it was sourced, this was how it was manufactured, and you can have that audit trail so that if anyone wants to pull that claim apart, you can put some solid evidence there. And I think that is going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take industry collaboration. You know, the whole point of commodities is we trade them between ourselves. And consequently, we're going to have to start opening up some of that data to each other to ensure that you can actually start to do end-to-end visibility, not traceability, that's something different, but end-to-end visibility and transparency to enable justifiable claims.
Yeah, I mean, we should be trying not. There's so many polarized things in the world at the moment. We should really do our best not to try to polarize the carbon, in industry versus consumer or NGO or whatever. Greenwashing would be bad, right? But don't put the offset market into that category. You know, anything can be used for good or for bad, and I think it's very important that we keep the messaging that, you know, yes, everyone needs to do their best to reduce pollution in their industry processes or whatever, but there are some things that technology just hasn't solved yet in that. And you know, if you say that carbon credits are bad, there's all of these forestation projects that are creating employment in Africa and things like that would suffer as a result. So, you know, until technology is up there, which we should keep a track on, and I think market forces will push that forward anyway. But don't be thinking of, you know, offsetting your carbon footprint with a worthwhile reforestation project in the Pantanal or the Amazon in Brazil or whatever as potential greenwashing. It really is planting trees, and you can really see that it's happening with the satellite imagery and the other sort of geospatial stuff that's happening. So yeah, I think to try to not to put too much emphasis on carbon credits is greenwashing. I think it's wrong, and I think it does a disservice to what everyone's trying to do.
Good. Well, I suppose moving on to the supply chain side of things, moving on to reducing supply chain footprints from the reduce and offset perspectives. Mark, what would you, from where you're sitting, what are the most promising technologies that you and ADM are seeing?
Yeah, so danger of blowing our own trumpet, but you know, a lot of people will know that ADM have invested heavily in carbon capture. I think the last figure I saw was 3.5 million metric tons. So we obviously see, and I know we're investing more, and they're all publicly announced. So it's, if you go to our website, you can see that. So we obviously see a value in that. I think from an ag perspective, it's still to be proven, and this is where we get back to this data point. But there are areas around the general concept of regenerative ag that can potentially sequester significant amounts of carbon, but also can reduce whether it's water usage. One other thing I would say is when we talk about sustainability, we do tend to make sure we focus on more than just carbon, and then we actually think about sustainability in the wider perspective, because carbon is important, but it's not just carbon. It's also child protection. It's also farmer grower incomes and that type of stuff. So apologies if that was a bit too much of a sales pitch. It wasn't intended.
It's all good stuff. And anyone else seeing anything that's standing out at the moment?
I mean, Joseph, sorry, or
yeah,
no, I think go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just on the earlier comments, my experience is more electricity market related, and getting back to something that 2 points that Mark made, which I think are well said. One, it's all about the data, so making sure that you can measure things, and then the whole thing around greenwashing claims like that become more transparent. So in the electricity sector or power sector, I think that over time retailers have done quite a good job on that. So claims around greenness is actually quite evident and stuff like that. So yeah, I full agreement with Mark there.
Yeah, I think the verification industry is at the beginning of a real boom in terms of, you know, being able to monitor and prove. I think one thing you have to be careful of is that we're measuring their footprint as well, because if the monitoring down to the nth degree is producing more of a footprint than the footprint that the monitoring, of course, you know, there is that aspect to it. But to Mark's point, and to Samir around what the likes of Expensify are doing, you know, yes, we need to try to standardize some of these things because we need liquidity, because, you know, this could be really, really big but it has to be done right. Right. We've already had Carbon 1.0, we're on Carbon 2.0. We've had other sustainability drives in the past, but now there is certainly much more gravitas behind it. But you know, there are no two carbon or no two environmental metrics absolutely identical. So that's standardization. Having a baseline, we all would like, I think, a baseline reference point, but then the premiums and discounts where we're adding additional premiums because of these other sustainable development goals, you know, creating employment in impoverished areas or cleaner water, you know, the 17 of them we could list, right? But having a base to then be able to they still need to differentiate some of these different projects because they do add other values, and to soil carbon and other regenerative agricultural practices. You have all of these different agricultural policies in different geographies, different jurisdictions. You know, how do you find that level playing field so that, you know, I said it in another panel, but it's important. You know, you've got a Brazilian farmer over here, 100,000 hectares. He has to reserve, well, down in Mato Grosso, 30% or more of his land for reserve. The closer you get to the Amazon, it's like 80, 90% of the land that they have has to be reserved, and they can only work on the rest of it. Now, you know, he's still got carbon that he can measure in his soil, but when you've got other jurisdictions where you don't have that onus anywhere else in the world, how do you find those level playing fields? And I think it's going to be interesting and no doubt very political in trying to move forward on this.
And that's an interesting word that you mentioned, Richard, because I see it a lot in energy markets and electricity in particular, standardization. So the more you have standardization, the more people can engage with it. So transmission system operators or distribution system operators, they're standardizing the way that information and the data is collected or exchanged, and that allows more engagement then by, you know, the trading companies or whatever service providers, which ultimately helps more renewables onto the system and furthers the net zero goals. So standardization is key. Different aspects, but it's key in there as well.
It certainly helps the technology companies, right? As well, right? And it's about it, you know, the onus on the technology platforms to be able to collect the right data, have the right, obviously standardized, nice, simple futures contract would be good, but it's not like that. It's very OTC. It's very, you know, bilateral sort of negotiations. So having those flexible platforms to help capture these premiums and help with the auditing and the reporting, you know, it's key. More key in these non-physical sort of areas, ethereal carbon or whatever it is, versus, you know, bales of cotton you can go and count in a warehouse. It's going to be, you know, technology is going to be key to making this a key enabler. Let's call it, Mark. I guess it's an enabler, but we still need to change behaviors. Yeah.
Fortunately, we have this new set of technology that's really great for traceability, and and has powered a whole ecosystem by itself. I mean, I think blockchain tech is really interesting for this traceability. And to Richard's point, you know, when used in a way that doesn't create its own carbon problems.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'll say one more point. Verification came up, and you know, the cost of verification. One of the things that I think we're going to have to be very careful about is, yeah, do we need 100% accuracy, but we can only verify 50%, or can we live with 90% accuracy, but we verify 95%?
Yeah.
And if we can get you know, confirmation or alignment around how accurate satellite is for verifying certain things, how accurate certain sensors are, then we can create a much broader verification playing field. It probably is not as accurate as having boots on the ground, but boots on the ground has a huge expense. So that's going to be an interesting conversation to see how that moves forward.
Yeah, completely.
Well, following on quite neatly from that, I'd like to direct the next question to you as well, Mark, and that's actually about the economics of the supply chain. You know, is someone willing to pay for this transformation, and actually who should it be? Who should be involved?
So I can only talk from a ag's perspective. If we're not careful, it's the grower that's paying for some of this. And actually what we need to ensure, as Richard was saying, is that the economics flow, so that if the grower is having to put in extra work, if they're having to do extra effort, that those economics flow, so that they're actually not just rewarded, but actually incentivized to follow some of this. And at the moment, that is a very difficult thing to achieve because of the lack of transparency in certain parts of the supply chain, but also because there isn't that feeling of connection between the end consumer and the trust in some of the claims that are being made. So economics will have a huge impact.
Yeah. So following on from that, then going back to Richard, you know, what on the reporting, the documenting side of things, what technological innovations have you been seeing in reporting and documenting, and what do you see as the greatest challenges the industry really faces in that area?
Yeah, I mean, there will be, you know, it's all very nascent in terms of what you need to report, when you need to report it by, and who you need to report it to and stuff. But there's a lot of data. The data around the projects, are they valid? Are they being verified on a regular basis? Can we do it with satellite imagery and drones and stuff like that to reduce the expense of boots on the ground? I think, you know, in a way, it's sort of the song remains the same from a technology perspective. There's a lot of data there. It needs organizing. It needs workflowing. It needs to help make sure that, you know, you have the documentary trail. You know, that documentary trail can be, you know, a block on a blockchain. It's still documenting what's happening. You know, I guess when you have the whole network, when you have the whole supply chain on these new promising technologies around the blockchain, etc., you know, can't wait for that to happen. It sounds like you're making some good progress there, Samir. But there's a lot of stuff on monitoring people's impact. There's stuff on monitoring the projects that are trying to address the balance. But this missing middle bit, which is where our focus is right now, on making sure the contracts are right, that you're taking into account, your host country approvals and everything on your credits to make sure that they will be worth something tomorrow. Making sure your contracts are correct, that you've got all of the optionality for replacement and stuff like that if something goes wrong. That's sort of our focus, and then that granular inventory management of bringing it through, so that when somebody says, you made this claim, show me, and whether it's through a blockchain or it's just bilateral sort of sharing that data through the supply chains, as we've been doing the last 20 years, that's the practical stuff that's happening today in order to address it. So it's technology, data management, and data sharing, isn't it?
Excellent. Well, I'd like to now move over to Joe. Moving on to the trading side, and particularly looking into power markets, we're seeing an absolute plethora of new assets, new products. What does that mean? How does that all translate for the systems we use?
Yeah, so when I think of a trading system, then I always, at a high level, it really reflects the structure of the company and the internal processes they have. So then if you think of a company that's engaging in physical short-term power markets, whether they be supply or demand, what we're seeing in particular over the last 10 years is that there's an awful lot more players participating in these short-term markets. There's a lot more renewable and variable generation, and the unpredictability associated with that. We're seeing incredibly dynamic supply and demand stacks, and what that immediately transmits into is very volatile market prices. And the other complicating factor for participants is that there's a number of trading opportunities. So not alone can you trade in day ahead markets, but there's intraday continuous. You've got ancillary services, balancing markets. So it's a complex environment that participants are now engaging in compared to 10 years ago. And what you see, or what we observe, is that the trading systems are changing to reflect these more complicated environments. And the one thing I would say is that when we're talking about net zero, we're going to need a lot more renewables on the system, a lot more battery capacity, and the trading systems and technologies we use, the digital technologies, they're going to have to continue to evolve at pace, I would say.
Okay. Any other panelists have any thoughts on that?
I would agree that the battery technology seemed to be critical, right? Just because of the shock absorbing nature of what they do, and we're seeing that come online in a big way in the U.S.
And I think the whole context of this discussion, we started off talking about carbon capture and related stuff, and I think that's right, the perspective. So we need physical assets and physical infrastructure to actually concretely get to net zero. We need that monitoring, financing of these assets. But then the other component which follows on is the digital solutions that help us accommodate more of these things on the system, how we capture that data, how we manage it, how we interact with the markets, and that's a particular area of focus for me.
Sticking with you, Joe, actually, another question I'd have for you is, what are the data processes, models, and so on, which will really allow participants to engage and thrive in this dynamic, to say the least, environment?
Yeah, I would say it's really like building a house, for those who have had the joy or the pain of building a house. Right, so the foundations, what are the foundations here? It's something that Mark touched upon. It's getting the data in-house. That's absolutely critical. So getting the system-wide data, forecast wind, demand, market prices, data for your own portfolio, making sure you have those nuts and bolts in place, those foundations, so that subsequently you can do stuff. So then what are the walls of this house? I would say that it's really having tools that can assist, that humans can make simple decisions. So whether it's visualization tools or simple reports, that you or I can look at it and go, yes, I should, wind is coming down, I need to participate in that market. Finally, the roof of this house, I would say this is really an iterative process in that how can we assist humans or individuals to make more intelligent decisions? And that's really where, you know, your modeling team in conjunction with your traders can start asking the questions that are pertinent to their business. Use then historical data to say, you know, are these hypotheses or conjectures correct? How predictable are these areas that we're investigating? And from that then, and those questions and that iterative process, you can start using predictive analytics, statistics or algorithms. People can say AI and machine learning, but it's ultimately statistics and algorithms in their daily businesses. So I'd say start off with the nuts and bolts, or the foundations, have the information in-house. Once you're comfortable with that, then you can think about the walls and the roof in your building.
And we've got a panel of data specialists in data in different guises. Does anyone else have a thought on that? Perhaps even outside of the power context.
Yeah, again, from an ag's perspective, it's exactly the same. We've got to start getting the data, and you know, one of the things that we're going to have to solve is privacy. Because some of the data, particularly in ags, you can be referencing back to a specific farm, a specific farm holder. If I'm trading some of my stuff to the competition, do I really want to hand that sort of data over? Or can we find secure ways of exchanging the critical part of that data so that we can get that transparency and we can truly understand the carbon intensity or the impact of what we're all doing? That's going to take some very clever people, but it is possible.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's where it would need to ultimately be. You just need to know that in order to get it to the next stage, that this guy has been validated to some degree or whatever, and that you trust the certificate. And again, people have been doing that for donkey's years already, but it needs to be, you know, digital. Will make it more scalable and easier to get those dashboard reports in front of Joe's teams. But yeah, on that privilege, I completely agree.
Good. Well, Samir, I'll direct the next question to you. You know, you work with a wide portion of the industry. What are the specific interfaces and models that you know you see as being asked for by clients?
Yeah, so some of the models that we see are pretty obvious. They're things like managing credits and managing their life cycles, managing their expiries, et cetera. But then some of these things are getting harder, right? Managing eligibility, and I think managing potential eligibility, managing actual usage of eligibility. And then I think some of the things that have come up on this panel are interesting too, which is things like modeling sort of triple bottom line impact of each of the different things that people are trading, and then interconnecting it with the credit eligibility and credit meaning are probably a next level thing. Just referring to the last question, you know, if the industry could get its head around a common digital or communication standard for all of this, right? Everything from the triple bottom line carbon impacts to modeling the eligibility in a consistent way and the credits in a consistent way, I think that would go a long way to helping the whole industry move forward.
Thank you. Well, Richard, we'll now shift over to you. How are you seeing the data ecosystem developing within the net zero context in terms of, particularly in terms of collection, tracking, and reporting?
Yeah, I mean, it's about companies today, they that are involved in this, they have a need to scale very fast, or they need to have a need to scale yesterday. And then you've also got, you know, the expertise in the marketplace, people who understand what's going on to drive that, because, you know, you might say that the software, it's only a database. You still need the expertise or whatever. So in acknowledging those two particular challenges that people who are trying to scale now and finding it difficult, you know, we've put together Net Zero OS. So it's specifically for trying to solve these problems, so that you don't necessarily need not everybody needs to be a carbon expert in order to be part of your carbon desk. So, you know, it's helping to train and onboard new employees. These are the steps you need to go through to get a good contract. These are the steps you need to go through in order to retire a credit, etc. And these are the buttons you press to get to your dashboard or whatever it is. So that's really interesting to us, and I feel like you know, that is that first immediate need that we're trying to solve in trying to, you know, productize that carbon expertise into some workflow processes, understanding what data we need to collect along the way, which other technologies are out there that, you know, with your APIs to make the most use out of everything. So obviously not everyone's trying to reinvent the wheel and end up with that monolithic situation like we've been through on the CTRM side of things. You know, a lot of lessons learned there, I think, in the industry. So yeah, and that needs to be solved so that they can then talk to blockchains. Do you see what I mean? If it can't all be there, and it's also, you know, it's not addressing the immediate needs. So that's where I think the focus is now, and it's certainly our focus.
Very good. Any of the panel have any additional thoughts on that? No, that's fine. Well, my next question, I had one around AI, but looking at the audience Q&A, I think I prefer Paul Hallas's question on AI. This also had a number of upvotes, and Paul, good to see you again. So I would like to direct this question firstly to Joe, and then anyone else who wishes to answer. The question is, in which areas does the panel see the most significant contribution of AI in the transition towards net zero? Real-time algo trading is there already, I suspect.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the electricity markets, because I do a lot of work there. So I think we need to be slightly careful when we use the word AI, as in it is not a magic button. And when we think about AI, I always think of it really in terms of, again, statistics and algorithms. And really, it's about the people, the traders or the modeling team asking the right questions, and it's really that iterative process. Now, I think it's absolutely critical that getting that right, given the volatility in market prices, the amount of additional assets you will have in your portfolio. I think that process is critical to participants' businesses and stuff, but there isn't a magic solution that you can just deploy out there. It's continually changing and evolving, and people need to be working on it regularly and continuously.
Thank you. Anyone else care to contribute to that one around AI, his role?
Yeah, so AI and machine learning models seem to do well when there are large amounts of data, larger than a human can easily process, right? And if we think about the evolution of the commodities market from, let's say, 1970s oil to 20-teens electricity, we're rapidly approaching a situation where there's more data than a human can easily model. It would seem that carbon, if we view that as the next big commodity, is there. If you include all the traceability aspects to it, if you include locational differences, quality of farms, quality of plants, etc., there really may be something there for, again, back to the point about triple or double bottom line impacts, for AI to more accurately judge double or triple bottom line impacts of certain types of transactions or certain types of commodities? I think that's a really interesting question.
And the final thing I'd say on that, following on from Samir, is that, and to answer Paul's question, in my view, without significant contribution from AI statistics, machine learning, deep learning, I don't think we will get to net zero. Actually, I think it's exactly that, the amount of data, managing the system, it's becoming much more complex how people manage the physical electricity system, and it's a critical. Without advances, it won't happen, in my view.
Yeah, just building on that, I think there's a very practical end of AI. If we can use it to optimize the production process, if we can use it to optimize the transportation process, and we reduce therefore our consumption, that will have a huge impact. And that's something we can all start doing relatively easily. And then it's getting that data, that huge volume of data that says these are the practices, whether it's in the electricity, whether it's in running your data center, whether it's in farming, using AI to really help optimize some of those that hopefully, we better all hope we'll really start to see us either sequester carbon or reduce our consumption of carbon, or generate more for the same.
There is an element to consumer intelligence. I don't know if that's maybe I got myself in trouble there, but turning the skybox off or not throwing half your food in the bin. There's some consumer intelligence that will create so much more of an impact immediately than trying to get hold of all of this data so that AI can run its magic.
Yep, absolutely. Don't get me started on hybrid cars.
Well, we're nearly out of time. We did have one audience poll that I'd like to just throw out there to get a beat on the audience right now. You should see this popped up right now. Investment question. We spoke a lot about investments earlier. Have current fuel and energy prices changed yours and your business's behavior and investment patterns? And while everyone keeps voting away on that one, I would really just like to say a huge thanks to all of our panel for their insights today, and to you, the audience, for joining. It's been a really interesting session. This panel recording will be sent out via email within the next 2 days. If you found it of interest, do please share with your colleagues and your wider network. If I, or particularly if any of the panelists here, have piqued an interest, do drop us a line, or even easier, connect via LinkedIn. And yeah, do join us tomorrow for day 2 of the online event. We'll be kicking off at 2:30 UK time with a deep dive into carbon markets. So yeah, again, many thanks, audience, panel. You've been fantastic. And yeah, wishing you all an excellent day or evening ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.